When the Nile runs red, the world looks away. When Khartoum burns, they call it instability. But those who have walked its streets know. They know it's not instability. It is interference wearing the mask of peace. Once upon a time, Sudan stood as a bridge between the Arab world and Africa, between the desert and the Nile, between memory and modernity. And yet, as we speak, that bridge is burning from both ends. This war did not begin with the first gunshot. It began with silence. The silence that comes when the people are told to choose between two generals instead of a nation. It began when offshore interests discovered gold beneath Sudanese soil and realized that peace would cost too much profit. And now, Sudan, well, the land that once built the pyramids of Kush has now become the playground of shadow patrons. They call it a conflict, but what it really is an auction of sovereignty. On this channel, we once celebrated the swearing in of Sudan's new leadership, a rare sign of hope after decades of dictatorship. We called it progress, and then we woke up to this, a war that eats its own children, a war fought not by invaders, but by brothers. This is not a civil war. It's a mirror war, a reflection of how greed and manipulation can turn comrades into combatants. The soldiers in the streets wear Sudanese uniforms, but the hands that load their magazines stretch far beyond its borders. And so today, we ask not just who fired the shots, but who profits from the echo. To understand the present, we must walk backwards through time. Sudan's curse began not with blood, but with bureaucracy. When Britain and Egypt ruled together under the Anglo-Egyptian condominium, they split Sudan into two unequal worlds. A northern elite fluent in Arabic and English, and a marginalized South left illiterate and impoverished. This division created a class that governed for the crown instead of for the country. That colonial architecture still defines the power map of modern Sudan. Khartoum became the city of ministries, privilege, and the military. Darfur became the symbol of neglect and rebellion. In 1956, Sudan gained independence, not unity. The British flag left, but its borders of inequality remained. From Jafar Nimeri's coups to Omar al-Bashir's 30-year rule, Sudan became a cycle of revolution and reversion. Each regime repeating the same promise of renewal, each ending in the same betrayal. Then came 2019, right? The youth rose, doctors, teachers, women, workers. The beating heart of Sudan filled the streets chanting, Huriya Salam wa Adala, Huriya Salam wa Adala, which is freedom, peace, and justice. I hope I got that right? The dictator fell, but his shadow remained, his militia, his debt, his generals. From those shadows stepped two men. General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan, heir to the state-owned power, and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, Hemedti, the desert warlord turned businessman. And I know I'm butchering the names, but pardon with me. So, two generals, one country, and zero trust. April of 2023, Sudan was meant to transition back to civilian rule. Instead, it transitioned back into chaos. Burhan feared that merging the RSF into the national army will dissolve his authority. Hemedti feared subordination will erase his empire, a network of gold, trade, and private security deals stretching across borders. By dawn, tanks rolled through Khartoum. By noon, airstrikes pounded Omdurman. By dusk, the city that once overthrew dictatorship was once again under siege, this time by its own liberators. But the timing reveals more than coincidence, right? Just weeks earlier, shipments of communication equipment had quietly arrived through Port Sudan. Satellite data later exposed aircraft landing at RSF and army-controlled airstrips, unmarked, foreign-registered, carrying aid. The war was not spontaneous. It was sponsored. Someone, somewhere, decided that a united sovereign Sudan was bad for business. And in the language of offshore interests, instability is investment opportunity. When bullets fly, banks go quiet. But behind every explosion, there's an invoice. Money moves through nonprofits and development foundations, which are headquartered in European tax havens. Primary military contractors sell security consultation packages. Media training grants funded propaganda disguised as civic education. These are not coincidences. They are chess moves. Offshore interests have learned a simple truth. If you can't control a nation's territory, control its narrative. If you can't colonize with armies, colonize with algorithms. The modern empire doesn't need borders. It needs bandwidth. That is how recolonization thrives in silence. Through headlines shaped abroad, peace conferences hosted overseas, and promises that always seem to expire before delivery. And in the fog of this digital war, Sudan's real enemies are not always visible because they are the ones sponsoring both sides. Every bullet has an accountant. Every ceasefire has a shareholder. Sudan's geography and wealth makes it irresistible. You have gold from Darfur, oil from the south, and the Red Sea corridor, which is a gateway between Africa, Arabia, and the global trade. When sanctions close one door, offshore corporations open another. Contracts appear overnight, signed by shell companies with generic names like Nile Energy Development Group or Dar Investment Partners. Same faces, new logos, same agenda, which is profit over peace. Between 2017 and 2022, more than $13 billion worth of gold vanished into offshore vaults. Some of that gold stabilized foreign currency even as Sudan's pound collapses. The war isn't just about control, it's about currency. When Sudan burns, offshore portfolios rise. There's a place in Darfur called Jebel Amer, a mountain of gold so rich that locals say the earth bleeds yellow. It's also where Sudan's tragedy glitters the brightest. The Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, seized the mines years ago, controlling trade routes through Libya and Chad. Each bar of gold refined there passes through a network of brokers, eventually reaching refineries in the UAE and beyond. In return, they get weapons and fuel flown back through the same channels. The gold pays for the guns protect the gold. But the story doesn't even end there. Even the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, runs its own mining operation under the National Development Programs. The profits off the books, untraceable, finance, logistics, foreign lobbying, and political influence. Gold, right? The supposed gift of the Nile has become the devil's contract. And here's the cruel irony. While Sudanese families flee under gunfire, their nation's gold helps stabilize the very foreign economies funding their misery. That's how offshore interests operate, by buying peace abroad with chaos at home. Sudan's geography is its curse and its crown. To the east lies the Red Sea, a coveted artery for military bases and shipping control. To the west, Darfur's mineral belt glitters with untapped reserves. To the south, vast farmlands lie waiting for agribusiness deals in air-conditioned hotels far from the soil. Instability keeps these assets cheap. War creates urgency. Urgency creates opacity. And opacity, that is the thief's best friend. While civilians line up for bread, foreign investors line up for concessions. While peace talks stall, mining contracts move forward. In Sudan's tragedy, somebody always profits. For every headline that says peace talks resume, there are 100 funerals with no cameras. Hospitals in Khartoum operate without power. Mothers sterilize scalpels with candlelight. Doctors reuse gloves because supply routes are blocked. The war has displaced over 9 million people, right? The largest population movement in Africa since Rwanda. Every mile of fleeing footsteps is a sentence written in dust. We are tired of dying for politics. But war doesn't just destroy bodies, it destroys belonging. Entire generations are growing up with no sense of what Sudan looks like without smoke. A teacher in Umdurman wrote in a letter smuggled across the border. It says, "We used to teach geography, now we only teach survival, because the map keeps changing faster than our lessons." This is the invisible scar, when knowledge itself becomes unstable. Sudan's children are not just losing schools, they are losing the idea of a future that isn't owned by someone else's agenda. Wars like this don't survive on bullets alone, they survive on borders. To the west, Chad plays a double broker, right? Publicly calling for peace while privately allowing the RSF supply chain to pass through its frontier. To the north, Egypt shelters the SAF officers and quietly influences Khartoum's diplomacy, afraid that a failed Sudan could push refugees towards Cairo. To the east, the UAE acts as financier. Gold trades in Dubai that originate in Darfur are washed through legal channels under foreign investment. To the south, Ethiopia watches nervously, fearing that the spillover could reignite its own fragile peace. Everyone condemns the violence, yet everyone profits from its continuation. Because chaos in Sudan does not stop at the border. It fertilizes other agencies, right? Control over the Red Sea corridor, access to untapped energy corridors, proxy influence between the Gulf and African states. That is why Sudan's war keeps burning. It's not a failure for peacekeeping, it's a success for profiteering. And until the continent enforces its own narrative, right? External patrons will keep scripting the tragedy. There's a saying from Nubia, right? Silence is the wound that never closes. Sudan's silence is deafening. The African Union holds meetings, right? The United Nations issues reports, but neither can speak with conviction when the sponsors of the war sits in the front row of their conferences. Their silence is not diplomacy, it's complicity. We saw it when resolutions were watered down to avoid offending donors. We saw it when refugee camps were left unfinanced while mining contracts were expedited. We see it every time dialogue becomes euphemism for delay. The tragedy is not that Sudan is at war. The tragedy is that Africa has learned to normalize it. Every delayed reaction tells the offshore investors, you have time. Every unchallenged narrative tells the profiteers, you have cover. And so the cycle continues. Not because Africa is powerless, but because Africa is patient. Too patient. There comes a moment when patience becomes permission. And in that moment, sovereignty begins to die. Not with a scream, but with whisper. When you study Sudan's modern history, one thing becomes clear. Every tragedy began with a promise. The promise of democracy in 1956, the promise of stability under Nimeri, the promise of faith under Bashir, the promise of freedom in 2019. And yet every promise becomes profit margin for someone else. The colonizer no longer sails with ships. He now travels by cloud, storage clouds, data clouds, media clouds. And what used to be cotton and ivory is now data and narrative. What used to be missionary Bibles is now the algorithm feed. Sudan's story mirrors Africa's largest paradox. Every time we stand to speak, someone offers us a microphone wired to the agenda. We're told to be grateful for peace talks that never end. We're told to celebrate foreign aid that returns to its sender with interest. We're told that independence was achieved, but no one mentions that our currencies, our content, our confidence remains imported. Sudan is not an isolated conflict. It's a mirror reflecting what happens when Africa inherits borders, but not blueprints, resources, not control. The Nile still flows, but it no longer feeds unity. The pyramids still stand, but they no longer speak of power, only persistence. We must ask ourselves, when did resilience become our only export? When did survival become the new definition of sovereignty? Family, listen. If Sudan is bleeding today, then Africa is hemorrhaging tomorrow. This is not a Sudanese problem. This is an African test to see if we can protect our own from becoming auctioned once again to offshore interests wearing diplomatic ties. Here's the truth. The continent does not lack heroes. It lacks continuity. We praise Nkrumah but ignore his warnings. We quote Lumumba but repeat his fate. We celebrate revolutions but never institutionalize them. It's time to move from hashtags to headquarters. It's time to move from protests to policies. It's time to move from outrage to ownership. We must build continental media alliances that report to African interests, not foreign lenders, not foreign funders. We must fund our own research centers so that truth is not filtered through foreign mouths. We must teach in our own language so that our children think like creators, not interpreters. Every African capital should have a unit to track external economic influence, not as paranoia, but as policy. Because the greatest security threat we face isn't terrorism, it's dependency. If you want peace in Sudan, we must first end the business models of conflict. As long as war remains profitable, peace will remain performative. To the people of Sudan, from Khartoum to Nyala, from Port Sudan to Al Fashir, your struggle is not in vain. History remembers not those who won, but those who refuse to surrender truth. You've shown the world that an African nation can stand alone against external patrons and still demand its voice. And to those watching across the continent, learn from Sudan's pain, because the same blueprints used to divide Khartoum are already being redrawn for Kinshasa, Nairobi, and Accra. The pattern is always the same. First, they praise your democracy, then they finance your division. Then they mourn your collapse, from a safe distance. But we're no longer the children of colonial kindness. We are the descendants of those who survived chains and still built kingdoms. And let this be our pledge, right? That never again will Africa's wars be funded by its own resources. That never again will African youth be sold dreams written by foreign hands. That never again will a continent with so much blood to remember have so little power to decide. Because the truth is the one weapon they cannot buy. And unity is the only one strategy they cannot predict. This is the one African network, the Voice of Africa, where stories are told by us, for us, and never against us.